reports of an unidentified hostile organism that we'll refer to as alternates. Until we have a complete understanding of the threat, it's important to stay home, lock all doors and windows, and have access to a loaded firearm or any ranged weapon at all times. You will know if an alternate exists solely based on their physical characteristics. If you see another person that looks identical to you, run away and hide.
The most famous serial killer in history. In 1888, a man terrorized the streets of Whitechapel, London for 12 weeks with brutal and gruesome murders. He mainly went after prostitutes and had a knack for slit throats, mutilated bodies, and on one occasion he was said to have eaten the kidneys of one of the victims. One very particular thing about this case was that the victims were gutted in a very precise way, and it was speculated that he might be a medical professional. There are only 5 confirmed victims, however it's said that there were many more. To this day, he was never found, but Jack the Ripper remains.
I would have peed myself if I saw this. So Sale was a paper delivery boy years ago, and what he saw on his route is terrifying. Before we dive in, if you love ghost stories, make sure you check out my podcast. This week's episode is all ghost stories from listeners. So when Sale was a paper delivery boy, he always delivered to this one house in his neighborhood where an old woman lived. She was not in great health, so she actually had given him a key so he could let himself in and leave the paper on the table. One day he lets himself in the middle of the day, and he sees that she's in her room lying in her bed fully asleep. This is not normal for her, so he calls to her, but she doesn't answer. So he puts the paper on the table and he just heads out. But the next day is the same exact thing. He comes into her house and she's asleep in her room, not moving and not answering. So he's like, okay, if I come back tomorrow and it's the same thing, I'm going to call for help. Except the next day when he arrives, she greets him at the door. And she's saying things like, thank you so much for delivering my paper. I loved seeing you around. I'm gonna miss you. And he's like, okay, that's kind of weird. So the next day he comes back to deliver the paper and there's cars all outside. So Sale runs up to a police officer and is like, what's going on? And the police calmly explains that the woman in the house had passed away days prior and a neighbor finally noticed and called it in. So then who did Sale see when he went to the house?
The Teletubbies conspiracy theory claims that the show was inspired by events in a Bulgarian mental facility called La La Land. Psychotic children were purportedly isolated in dark rooms, and apparently 4 children who died on the same day inspired the characters in Teletubbies. Lala's facial disfigurement and 5 years of isolation inspired Lala. Tuatei, a deaf, facially deformed child, was tied to the fence outdoors and frostbitten, inspiring Tinky Winky. Donka, starving and unwell, inspired Dipsy by lying in his vomit for days. Ultimately, Paulina fell into a fire and was roasted alive, inspiring Poe. So why are they called the Teletubbies? The children's main source of comfort were the television sets in their room, and when they got word that the mental institution was getting rid of them, the children concocted a plan to hide the TVs. The children would rip out their insides to hide the miniature TV sets that were too big to swallow, only to be found dead by the returning caregivers the next morning.
How could I sound anything silly? I'm plastic. I don't even have a voice box. I had to borrow this one. Don't turn on the light.
Are you going to kill me?
This Polish woman is claiming to be the missing Madeleine McCann, but did you know there's age progression photos done of Madeleine that could help us know what she would look like today? In 2007, Madeleine was taken from her family's bedroom while they were on vacation in Portugal. And immediately the parents came under fire because they did leave the kids asleep in the apartment by themselves while they went to dinner with friends. This is the official age progressed photo of Madeleine to age 9, and this is the woman who's now claiming that she is Madeleine. And this woman does have some of Madeleine's signature features. Here you can see a black speck that looks like a pupil in Madeleine's eye, which is something they both share. She's also claiming that she has a lot of missing memories from childhood, but the eye speck does seem to be her most convincing argument. But German prosecutors actually believe that Madeleine is no longer alive. And 2 people believe they saw this man carrying a small girl towards the beach around the time that Madeline's parents first noticed that she was missing. But that being said, it's not completely impossible that she would be alive today.
If you see another person that looks identical to you, run away and hide.
There are 5 different types of angels according to the Bible. The first one is the seraphim, who are described in Isaiah as having 6 wings. With 2 of the wings they cover their face, and with another 2 they cover their feet, and with the last 2 they're flying. Their whole role and purpose is to praise God in heaven, saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is filled with His glory." The second type is cherubim. These things are crazy looking, being described in Ezekiel 10 as having human features, except for the fact that these things are on fire, having 2 to 6 gigantic wings. They have a green crystal spinning wheel floating next to them, and they have eyes covering every inch of their body, including the wheel. And the craziest part is that they have 4 faces. The right face is a lion, the left an ox or a cherub face, in front is an eagle, and in back a human face. God placed one of these in the Garden of Eden in Genesis to keep Adam and Eve from re-entering, and the most well-known cherub is none other than Lucifer, the devil himself. The third type is archangels. Very little is known about them, and they're only mentioned a couple times in the Bible in 1 Thessalonians and Jude. The word comes from the Greek word archangelos, which means chief angel, so they're most likely in leadership roles over other angels. In Jude, we learn that the only archangel to be mentioned by name is Michael. He's the leader that we see lead the other angels to kick out Satan and his followers out of heaven, and the one in Revelation to fight off the dragon in the end times. So fourth type is warrior angels. These are shown in Revelation 9 as being an army of cavalry. The riders are described by John as having fiery red, dark blue, and sulfur yellow breastplates, and the horses they ride on have tails like snakes with heads on the end, and their own heads are that of a lion with fire, smoke, and sulfur coming out of their mouths. They're being led by the archangel Michael to fight off the forces of the devil in the end times. The fifth type is messenger angels. These angels are the ones that give messages to humans directly from God. The main one that we know of is Gabriel, as he was the one to give the message to Zechariah and Mary that they are going to have a child, even though it wasn't physically possible for either of them to have a child. Though we don't know what they look like, we do know that they were terrifying to behold, specifically Gabriel, as he had to say multiple times to people to not be afraid. And so next time your friends ask you how many angels there are, you can tell them that
look like an angel, walk like an angel.
If you see another person that looks identical to you, run away and hide.
You guys remember the scary story, The Creature in the Cellar? The story goes like this. There was a little boy named Tommy who was so utterly terrified of his basement. Anytime he was in the kitchen near the cellar door, he would scream and cry and kick and just want to leave. His parents decided to take him to see a therapist. When they asked Tommy why he was so scared of the basement, he just said that he always felt like there was a creature down there trying to get him. Tommy's dad said, "That's impossible. I go in the basement every day. I know that there's nothing down there." The doctor then told Tommy's parents to give him exposure therapy, which they basically said make him sit in front of the cellar door alone until he's not scared anymore. So that night, when it got dark outside, Tommy's dad nailed the basement door open, turned off all the lights, and lit a single candle, placed it on the kitchen table, and made Tommy sit in the kitchen alone in front of the basement door. That night, they went to check on Tommy in the kitchen and found that he had been mutilated and unalived. Nobody ever knew exactly what happened to Tommy, but it's safe to assume that he was attacked by whatever he saw living in the cellar.
What are some of the craziest things that people have confessed to at the end of their lives? Well, in this series, I'm going to show you some of the wildest stories I found. And I cover all sorts of spooky and true crime stuff on this page, so make sure you follow along. So this story comes from a woman who was helping her mother at the end of her mother's life. The woman actually lived in Europe, but her mom lived in China, so when she got the call that her mother wasn't doing very well, she made the long journey all the way back. And right when she gets there, her mother asks all the doctors and nurses to leave the room. She apparently wanted to be absolutely alone with her daughter. So the daughter's like, "What's up? Are you okay?" And the mom tells her she knows she doesn't have a lot of time left, so there's something she really wants to tell her. Her mother proceeds to tell her that she's not actually her biological mother. And obviously this comes as like a huge shock to the daughter, but it's nothing compared to what came next. The mother proceeds to tell her that when she was younger, she really wanted to have her own kids, but unfortunately she just wasn't able to get pregnant. And not only that, but she didn't have a lot of money, so going through an adoption agency wasn't necessarily an option. So she actually bought the daughter off the black market for adopted children in China, meaning she didn't know if the daughter's adopted parents gave her up willingly or if someone had taken her to put her on the black market. The mother actually passed away just shortly after that, and we haven't gotten any update from the poster if she got any more information on her biological family.
Oh no. No, 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 no.
I am telling you, doing night security, it's gotta be one of the scariest jobs. Okay, so this photo right here, this was captured by Michael Hostin on the 3rd floor bathroom of a Dallas shopping mall. The reason he took it was because he's night security and he heard noises coming from his bathroom, but he was nervous to check the actual stall, so he sends a picture to his coworker. After he sent the picture, he eventually leaves the bathroom, but then gets a text where his coworker says, "Keep your weapon drawn and call for backup." He had no idea what he was talking about until he increased the brightness of this picture. It's not easy to see in the dark, but with the photo enhanced and slightly brightened, you can see somebody peeking over the top of that middle stall. Someone was in there, looking directly at him as he searched the bathroom. But even with a visual, by the time backup eventually came, whoever this was, they were gone, and we were left with this picture.
If you are inside your home with the lights out, do not look outside your window. Turn on your lights before you look through any window. Do not leave your home if you see a figure outside. Even if he is turned away, do not look at him. Lock all doors and windows before turning off all lights inside your residence. Hide in a small space and call authorities. Do not move from hiding unless you hear an unfamiliar voice. If you do hear a familiar voice coming from inside your home, do not move. He is inside. He is inside. He is